The Detroit Pistons have traded away Jerami Grant, selected Jaden Ivey, and acquired Jalen Duren in the last few days in what has been the latest steps in a brilliant rebuild. So with the Pistons being one of the biggest winners of the 2022 NBA draft, let's talk about the rebuild of the Pistons and the potential dominance they could have moving forward. The Pistons started off a great few days with the trade of Jerami Grant. The trade of Jerami Grant has been inevitable since he signed the 3-year deal with the Pistons in 2020, but especially since he broke out in 2020 and proved he could be more than a high-level role player on the offensive side of the ball. Now, many were surprised by the little return for Jerami Grant, but so far in this offseason, it seems as though the trade value for some players is simply lower than expected, something that could end up being talked about down the line if that trend continues. Whether that is to be due to these players only having 1 year left on their contract, or it simply being a good buying market, the multiple first-round picks or a first-round pick and a good young package that had been heavily rumored was not what ended up being the return. And it was further proven that us as an NBA community don't really have a way of truly knowing the accurate value of players across the league. But nonetheless, the Pistons did get some future assets for a veteran with only 1 year left on his contract that could be used as a draft selection or in a trade down the line, which was something we saw come to fruition on Thursday night. Although I believe Jaden Ivey was not a good fit for the Kings, and I like Keegan Murray on their roster given the circumstances, the fact that Jaden Ivey fell all the way to the 5th pick in this draft is an absolute dream come true for the Detroit Pistons. As even with their bad lottery luck, they still managed to get the best guard in this class, and in my opinion is a very good fit alongside Cade. He is continuing to improve his three-point shot, and the fact that we saw so many improvements from Ivey from year 1 to year 2 in college bodes well for more continued development. The Ivey selection is also brilliant for the Pistons due to the presence of Cade Cunningham, as Ivey doesn't have to fulfill any point guard roles. Ivey gets to come in and be a shooting guard. He gets to be what Booker could be now alongside Chris Paul, as opposed to when Booker didn't have Chris Paul and had to be more of a point guard. I'm not saying Ivey's going to be as good as Devin Booker, but simply from a role perspective, Ivey gets to focus on less. He can go in and focus a bit more on scoring. He can still play make a bit, still ball handle a bit, but he doesn't have to be the primary facilitator. But Cade and Ivey should be great fits alongside each other, as both can be effective on and off the ball, although again, Cade will be that primary ball handler and facilitator, which can allow Ivey to focus more on his scoring, while Cade can have less shot creation responsibility as Ivey continues to develop. This backcourt projects as one of the most promising young guard duos in the league, with Cade being the elite player he is alongside a very promising athletic guard in Jaden Ivey. This has the chance to be the best backcourt in the NBA moving forward. The Pistons were already having a great draft night with the selection of Jaden Ivey at pick 5, but they became the biggest winners of the draft when they managed to get Jalen Duren, not to mention the fact for what they got him for. After pick 13 and in turn Jalen Duren was traded from the Hornets to the Knicks, the Pistons wanted into the mix and managed to acquire Jalen Duren alongside Kemba Walker as the Knicks looked to dump salary, who I would predict then will be bought out by the Pistons, and they acquired him for a first-round pick. But not just any first-round pick. This was the first-round pick via the Bucks that was acquired in the Jerami Grant trade. Meaning, they got Jalen Duren for a first-round pick 3 years down the line from the Bucks, essentially meaning it will be a late first-round pick. That move is absurd value, and to be able to move that up 3 years to acquire your starting center of the future is a brilliant move by the Pistons. Now, you could make the argument that the center position was not the greatest need for the Pistons, with Isaiah Stewart already on the roster, but Isaiah Stewart, 2 years into his career, has been good, but he isn't showing average to significantly above average center upside. There's still certainly plenty of time for him to improve at age 21, but he has still not shown that significant upside to say he's going to be a solid NBA center. He projects as being an NBA starting center that isn't great, like a bottom tier NBA starting center. He brings great energy on the glass and defensively, but does have a very limited game on offense with lower efficiency than you would expect for a center that has a simple offensive game. It is also worth noting that although Isaiah Stewart does not play small, he is 6'8", which does have its disadvantages against 7-footers. You can also make the argument that at pick 13, Jalen Duren was the best prospect available on the board, and so acquiring him for a pick that is 3 years away, that will likely not be a lottery pick given it is a Bucks first-round pick, is very, very good value from the Pistons. Jalen Duren, in my opinion, has greater upside at the NBA level than Isaiah Stewart, with great size, length, and athleticism, allowing him to have potential as a vertical spacer, a very good rim protector with good enough lateral quicks to be a good defender in space at the NBA level. Not to mention a very quick leaping ability, which bodes well for him as a rim protector moving forward, as well as a rebounder, specifically on the offensive glass, where he will get fairly significant offensive production. Ultimately, the Pistons got pick 13 and in turn Jalen Duren for a 2025 Bucks first-round pick. An absolutely brilliant move. Potentially the most exciting part of the Pistons offseason is their cap space, and the moves that they could still make because of that significant cap space and flexibility. When factoring in the trade of Jerami Grant, the salaries of their draft selections alongside the salary of Kemba Walker, the Pistons have roughly $37 million in cap space. If they buy out Kemba Walker, they can increase that to around $46 million, and they can increase it to nearly $60 if they move on from the contract of Kelly Olynyk. Point being, the Pistons have a lot of cap space and can throw a lot of money at a free agent this offseason. Part of that money will, of course, have to go towards re-signing Marvin Bagley, which I do think they will do. However, even with that signing, the Pistons will still be able to have max-level cap space if wanted. Now, I don't expect the Pistons to be inquiring too much about any of the marquee names of free agency, such as Bradley Beal or Kyrie Irving, but I do expect them to be interested in a couple restricted free agents. DeAndre Ayton, of course, has been the most heavily rumored of those options, and was someone I expected the Pistons to heavily pursue heading into this offseason, as the Suns seem reluctant to give him a max contract. However, with the draft selection of Jalen Duren, that signing now seems less likely, as the Pistons now already have their starting center of the future. I would not completely count out the Pistons from showing interest in Ayton, but there is another restricted free agent that is a much better fit with the current makeup of the Pistons roster, and in turn would be the one I would expect they show more interest in. That target will be Miles Bridges, whose contract situation is a little bit less obvious with regards to his value. It remains unclear whether any team would be willing to offer him a max contract, but the Pistons certainly have the cap space to do so if they want to acquire him. Now, is Miles Bridges worth nearly $35 million a year over the next 5 years on a max contract? Probably not, but that might be what it takes to get him this offseason on the open market, with multiple teams interested in either retaining or acquiring the young rising star. And for a team like the Pistons, adding such a player while you can with their current cap flexibility is probably a good option, even if it is a slight overpay. The Pistons have the ability to add to their drafted players if they can add a quality young piece like Bridges while they have significant cap space this summer or next summer. And because of that, I would expect the Pistons to submit an offer for Bridges and see if the Hornets are willing to match such a contract. The Pistons could show interest in other restricted free agents this summer, but are nowhere near as good of talents or fits as Miles Bridges. And in turn, I would not expect them to show much interest in acquiring players such as Mo Bamba or Lonnie Walker Jr. The point is that the Pistons have a lot of cap flexibility this offseason, and even after a great draft, could significantly improve their roster and cement themselves as a fairly competitive roster for next season. The Detroit Pistons may have had a good offseason so far, with the potential to still do so much more. But they've been doing things right since they started this rebuild, which, reminder, only started 2 years ago after moving on from Griffin and Andre Drummond, and then officially starting with a complete retooling of assets after the trade of Luke Kennard, which netted them the pick that became Saddiq Bey. Over the course of these 2 years, they have done several things very well. The thing that I have applauded them the most for and given them the most credit for is how they have bought low and sold high on many players throughout this process, with Jerami Grant being the most recent and obvious case, as he was signed as a free agent on a deal that many people considered to be much too significant, and now, well, you got a first-round pick for him, which gave you Jalen Duren. Not a bad move. Another example of this is Marvin Bagley, who they brought in at the lowest of his value at the trade deadline last year, and he has increased his value already since joining the Pistons, and they acquired him via players that they acquired on a low value, specifically former lottery picks Josh Jackson and Trey Lyles. Another very important part of the Pistons rebuild, as it is for any rebuild, is how well they have drafted. Surely you can make the argument that they have missed on a few selections, with Killian Hayes being the most obvious pick who has not yet shown great flashes, but again, is still only 2 years in and missed half of his first season. But the Pistons have managed to select a player as good as Saddiq Bey outside of the lottery. They also selected Isaiah Stewart outside of the lottery, and they got the opportunity to take a future star in Cade Cunningham, while now also taking the best guard in the 2022 draft alongside their potential future starting center. The Pistons are not quite at a point where they are comfortable favorites to make the playoffs, but they have got one of the best, if not the best, young core of any rebuilding and retooling team in the league, and have all of the makings of a future NBA title contender. That is my thoughts on the Detroit Pistons offseason so far and moving forward. Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more NBA content. Thank you for watching. Peace.